Oh, we should have had you get the back door, but that's okay. No. Good afternoon and welcome to Dnsop. I'm Tim, and that's Benno over there. Suzanne's on Meet Echo, I believe. So, last person in, could you please shut the back door? I appreciate that. Thank you. So, we've got a couple hours of good times ahead of us. Like I said, here are the chairs. There's the Jabber Room. Dan York. Dan, raise your hand, Dan. He's the Jabber Scribe. Thomas Peterson, where are you? Please raise your hand. He said he was going to take minutes. I don't see him. Oh, but I was going to say there's a link to the Etherpad, and so if folks have, if folks are stuck, or if you're stuck on that, we can sort of use that to help with that. Yes, Dan.
It's Dan. Is anyone in the Jabber Room? I can't connect to it right now.
I have not tried. Oh. Oh, no. Ray's just running away. So, okay. Our note well, I think this is Monday, so you probably, you haven't seen a lot of these, so, you agree with all the process and policies, blah, blah, blah. You can take a read of this and it's all good. There are blue sheets passing around. Please fill them in. I know there's a smaller crowd than normal, but definitely, definitely like to have our names on who's actually showing up. Oh, great. Since our last meeting, we've had some bad PDF failure. I always have this problem. So we've got 3 things in the editor queue, RFC editor queue, the IP6 RDNS, the terminology biz, which actually got an errata on the original one earlier this week, and refuse any. What's that? It's already fixed in the biz. Oh, good. I figured you'd take care of it, Paul. Thank you. And we've got 4 documents in the ISG sort of AD queue, the 2 outer leaf ones, which Dave's put out some new versions, just looks like today. And I will say there's some editorial things that I think everybody should probably take a look at. It's not that it's normatively bad, it's just that I think in doing the edits, there are a few things that got missed, and I think some eyes on it. I noticed John and Warner both found a few things, and I think if folks can take a little bit to just look at those and double check our work, I think those are really in good shape. KSK roles the same way. And session signaling, I believe in looking at all the emails that Mirja and Ted have sort of worked out all the details, and so we'll probably see that one moving forward as well. So that's kind of great. I was hoping something would get published between here and Montreal, but I know we sort of basically swamped Warren with work. So, we're in the same boat. Capture formats in IETF last call, and so that's moving ahead. And we finished up working group last call on algorithm update, and I just told the authors I will have the Shepherd write-up done by the end of the week. That's my promise. And also in working group last call, I started off extended error, which seemed to kick off a lot of people arguing about stuff, which is good because it got people reading stuff and sort of paying attention. So maybe we'll sort out what's going on there, and we'll get the extended error bits going. So, and next up for working group last call is I've been wanting to sort of push the 2845, the TSIG biz draft. This was something that was solved, you guys worked out back in Prague 2 summers ago, I think it was. And I've been sort of pushing on Stephen and Francois, sorry about that. I've been sort of pushing on you guys but there's a couple weeks, there's some changes that want to go through, but we're going to start that basically 2 weeks from today. So we'll give you a week, we'll give you this week, we'll give you the week when you get back, and you sort of catch your breath, and then we'll kick that off, and we'll do a working group last call on that one. And that one should be pretty straightforward to move through as well. So, and then I think this one's going to probably come up for adoption, but there's so much, this is just one of these things. There's a lot of positive discussion in OARC, but OARC is definitely a lot of TLD people and root zone people. So this one, it'd be interesting to see where this one goes. So, and there's maybe some other stuff. Ben and I were talking about this. There's other things sort of floating out there, but nothing's actually bubbled up enough that says, oh, let's add this to the pile for adoption. So, you know, we'll see. Maybe some stuff will come up today. You never know. And we have these 3 park documents we were just talking with Warren about, and this is something for Warren to deal with. So this basically Warren's work. You know, I'm not sure what to do with these, so we're just gonna let them sit for now. So on our agenda today, Dave Lawrence is going to talk about Surf Stale. So we're finally moving that one forward again, which I think is good. We're going to have a nice little discussion about A-Name, sort of talk about Tony's draft, bring up a couple of things that happened during the hackathon. We're going to probably comment about Ray's new thing that he cooked up recently, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But looking at sort of a, you know, can we sort of hash out a path forward? And then some Hoffman stuff, some 7816 biz, which is QNAME minimization, and 7706 biz, which is root zone, localhost. Some new stuff, which is good. So Alexander's got one on special labels, and some Yang model stuff, which, you know, we'll see how things go. And then if time permitting, which I think there is, Paul will talk about some more Doe stuff, because I guess they closed Doe. No, they haven't closed it. So I think they want to. They just haven't done it. So, but that's essentially what's going on in the working group. Most of, I think, what we've done in the last, since Montreal, is basically dealt with the big stack of documents that we sort of pushed out earlier this summer, and sort of just kept sort of Warren busy through the whole cycle. So, but we're just going to keep swamping you until you cry uncle. So, you know, that's how we go. So with that thing, I think Dave will kick off with Surf Stale, and then we'll get going on that. Cool. Oh, comments?
Actually, can I steal 2 minutes?
Sure.
So before the last, sorry, Warren, come on.
No, yeah, yep.
Before the last meeting, I asked people to please provide some feedback on Stuart Cheshire's IPv4.ARPA document.
Oh, yeah.
That got some feedback, and then it sat for a while. The document has had some motion, and so I'm still planning on AD sponsoring it. I will ask Dnsop to please have another look, and please remind me what all happened last time, because I've managed to swap it all out completely.
Yes.
So please remind me of what happened last time. As far as I know, it's mostly all dealt with and happy. But if there's anything, you know, that got missed, please let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
no, I thought that's right. I thought that one was pretty much all sort of, you know, worked out. So that reminded me of the other thing. There's a KSK role meeting later this week. And now I can't remember exactly what it was. So I'm gonna make Paul actually get up and actually tell me. So 4 o'clock on Thursdays. Thanks, Dave. So
it is, no, Wednesday, 4 o'clock on Wednesday in the Pagoda Room, and on Friday morning at 9 o'clock in the Chidlata 3 room. So these are not actually meetings. These are very loose side meetings. The purpose is for people to get up and say what they wanted to see the DNSSEC KSK be in the future, and much more importantly, why they are feeling that way. The idea is that if we have some face-to-face discussion, it's not somebody saying, I think it should be this. It's like, I think it should be this for this reason, and someone else can respond. So it'll be more of a round circle or whatever. I'm going to try to record them, but this is really just very informal early stuff. It's like a mic line, but sort of in a U-shaped room. Yeah. And nothing is going to come out of it definitive until we start like doing definitive stuff, which ain't going to be till next year, because the rollover is still not finished. For those of you who aren't following the list, we still actually have to revoke the old key. And as someone pointed out on the list, that actually, even though we're doing the revocation in January, it's not really complete till March. So, but then we will have some. But so the idea is, let's just talk about what you think. Hey, it should be done this way the next time.
Like faster in ECC?
It could
Something
be anything.
like
We have a list of things that people have thrown up at the mic line at DNSOARC, at the mic line at RIPE, some on the mailing list and such like that. There's a wide range of things people have said, this is what I'm looking for before. And some of them interact. You know, so for example, people are saying a standby key. Well, standby key interacts with a rollover, things like that. So just again, really it's to get people talking to each other and not just at each other on the mailing list. Let's see what that can do.
Okay, thanks. So Wednesday at 4, Friday at 9. Thank you.
You have no pink box. How am I supposed to know where to
I
stand?
noticed there's nothing, yeah.
Is this okay?
Yeah, I think that's all I did, so.
So before launching into the serve stale stuff, I just wanted to mention that as far as dough is concerned, there are some giant question marks, like Spanish upside down one in the front and in the back, around whether we're closing dough or not. And so stay tuned to this space. It's something still to be worked out.
And you're the co-chair.
Co-chair. Yeah.
So you can speak authoritatively.
Right. I can speak authoritatively that there's nothing to report.
Okay.
So Robert Edmonds on Twitter a while ago came up with this pun, observing that serve stale could be reparsed to being serves tail. I would like to, it was kind of amusing to me that it actually took like 5 years of us using this term to notice this. But there it is. And here's my clicker. For those of you who have not been paying attention, the basic idea behind the draft is that we're trying to increase resiliency on the internet when the authorities can't be reached in a timely manner by the resolver. You should only use this stale data in the event that you're in an exceptional circumstance. And it's meant to be a drop-in for the existing infrastructure that you shouldn't need to update your stub resolvers, which are typically very, very slow to update, even slower than the rest of the resolvers on the internet, in order to get new features. We do propose an EDNS option that can be used for either signaling your desire for stale data or not, or especially for debugging. And the reason I'm up here right now is because there are a few issues in the draft that are open and we'd like some discussion on. The standards track part of the document is that we're redefining the TTL to make it clear that you can use this expired data in some circumstances, namely the exceptional circumstances where you weren't able to refresh it in a timely manner from the authorities. There are two other interesting changes that are coming along with this, though. One of them is that I just happened to notice recently that RFC 2181 actually says that in your 32-bit TTL field, if the high order bit is set, that is, somebody has treated it as an unsigned integer when really that high order bit is undefined, that you should treat it as though the TTL was set to 0. That doesn't seem like a particularly good idea, particularly given some of the past badness that has revolved around having a TTL of 0. And so in this draft, what I have suggested is that really we should perhaps just treat as though the high order bit is not set. And so it's just the either cap it at the max or, well, right at the moment it says to treat it as the max, but in so observing, that means that you have a potential TTL of 68 years, which also is a pretty terrible idea in a lot of different ways. And it's noted that most resolvers, at least that we're familiar with, all have maximums already associated with them. Bind, I believe its default is a maximum of a week. Not, I think, is a day. And so it seems pretty reasonable that we should suggest that that there is kind of a, make a recommendation rather than that you must cap TTL, suggest that you use a default cap of some value like a week. And so we'd like some feedback on that, whether in fact it is also kind of supported that there be a recommended cap on TTLs. There are two different options in the current version of the draft. One, it's, as I previously noted, the idea is that the features, that this feature of being able to use stale data is not really meant to be, it's essentially opt out, which the IETF has made some statements that quite understandably that features should be opt-in where possible, but in this particular case, the feature is really intended to add resiliency to the existing deployed internet. And so the EDNS options are proposed not to say whether or not stale data is okay, but to say explicitly, hey, I know about the possibility of stale data. I'd like to know whether any of the data in my answer was stale or not. Stale aware clients could also then use this to ignore it if they really didn't want stale data. It should be noted that you can actually, like with the implementation I did for Bind, that because stale data is predicated on a resolution timeout, that if you ask for non-recursion, you should also then not get back stale answers. The problem with that, of course, though, is you wouldn't have recursion in the cases where it was going to come back just fine. Mukund has actually suggested also another non-EDNS way of doing this, that you could use that high order bit in the TTL in order to signal it. And thinking about it a little bit more, I have some concerns about this, not the least of which is what about the existing software out there that might be implementing RFC 2181 and then treating it as 0. But there are some suggestions that maybe 0 would actually be the right answer. But then if we're saying, don't treat it as 0, treat it as the max cap, I don't know, it just, that one seems a little bit more hackish to me. And as long as you're updating the software to understand this concept of staleness, then using the extension mechanism seems like the better way to go about doing it. The two different options, the more featureful one actually uses essentially an array of indices to which RR sets in the answer could be stale, because think about, for example, when you get back a full-featured, resolver answer, which not only fills in your answer, but also your authority in additional sections. And so you have multiple different records in there, possibly of the same type, any of which could be stale or not stale. So this option actually tries to make it really clear which exact records inside the answer are stale or not. But of course, this is going to be more complex for the code to track. And as Mukund pointed out on the mailing list, like one of the other reasons that this makes it more complex, besides just having to keep track as you're filling in the answer, but a number of servers have a feature where you can reorder the records in an answer. And so when they come back, between filling in the packet and then reordering records, the server would have to keep additional code state to understand which records it was pointing to were stale and not. Puneet and Warren came up with a simpler option that basically just says its two main salient features are you can indicate whether you want whether stale records are okay or not, and in your answer, if you've indicated stale records are okay and any of the records are stale, then you'll get it back. An indication of that. And so what we're really looking for here is do you want an EDNS option around this? And if you do, which flavor of EDNS option would you like to see, or come up with yet another idea? There are a number of timer values that we recommend within the draft. All of these are just recommendations. They're not must set to this. And so we'd really like to hear discussion on whether you think these values are appropriate. The client response timer, this is the timer that basically says, hey, you've gotten a request, you've kicked off a resolution for it, you haven't gotten back a resolution in this amount of time, but your client is waiting and wants something responsive. The 1.8 seconds actually came from my original implementation, which existed in a particular environment where I knew that the client that was talking to me through the stub resolver, if it would time out after 2 seconds. And so I wanted to allow maximum time to possibly get an answer back while still avoiding its timeout. There might be a better value in other circumstances. And so a little bit of discussion around that would help. The query resolution timer, this is actually an existing feature in almost all resolvers. As far as I know, all resolvers that basically says, don't spend too much time talking to every name server out there. It's bounding the work done by the resolver. It used to be 30 seconds and fine. Now it's a lot lower. Different servers have different values. And so this doesn't recommend a specific one, but kind of sets 30 seconds as the upper bound. The maximum stale timer is basically, once you put a record in your cache and you're willing to keep using it, how long should you keep it in the cache before you can finally discard it? This again comes from my original implementation where I used a week because I wanted the ability to have somebody respond to a situation manually even over a long weekend while still capping the amount of memory used. A week seems like a good upper bound to me, but that could use some discussion as well. And finally, there's been some discussion originally. I think in the first version of the draft, the TTL that was put on records that were returned was 1 second, because again, there are historically some problems around the 0 second TTL. Puneet pointed out that particularly in the Quad 8 environment, that the number of people that use Quad 8 as a forwarder it would be really helpful, since they are caching aware resolvers, to cap it at something more like 30 seconds, just so that you reduce the amount of activity that they're doing in the presence of stale answers. So I will point out that my general sense of all the feedback that I've gotten from it, I mean, I know at one point Tim called this a controversial proposal, but my general sense of it has been that it has not been particularly controversial, that there are a number of people that I've generally gotten very positive feedback on the idea, and I think Warren has heard the same. However, there's one person of note who has called it shockingly poor engineering, and also that it only has commercial benefits for a few large companies. I should point out that when I started this, I was working for a large provider, but that was not, I mean, the reason it was brought to the IETF was to make it generally beneficial for everybody. I am no longer with that company. I'm with a different, even larger company who has taken absolutely no position whatsoever on this. I happen, as a user of the internet, happen to think that this is the behavior that I want out of the internet, and that it does add the resiliency that I want to see. I don't see it as driven by commercial interest. I'm not sure where that comment really comes from, but I'm willing to have it dissected by others, but that's definitely not my sense of it. But I bring this out here since we have gotten that feedback. And I think, you know, if you're opposed to the idea, since I have generally found it to be well supported, now's the time to, you know, take it apart if in fact you are not in favor of it. And my personal goal, and Warren's, I believe, as well, is that once we get a couple of these other issues with timer values, recommendation, EDNS option kind of hammered out, that we'll be ready for last call. Stuart.
Stuart Cheshire, Apple. I think this is a really good idea. In fact, we think this is such a good idea that independently, before I knew about this, we did something very similar in iOS 12. I should say these criticisms probably apply to us as well. Whoever thought this was shockingly poor engineering would probably say the same thing. And I do work for a commercial company that sells products to customers. So we're definitely aiming at benefiting them. The iOS behavior is very similar. If there's an answer in the cache, even though it's stale, we will hand that to the client and say, this is our best guess, get to work on that. This works very nicely in conjunction with happy eyeballs connection racing. We wouldn't do it otherwise because a bad answer is a dead end. But if you're doing connection racing, then a best guess now and a better guess half a second from now, you throw them into the bag of candidates and you see which one succeeds. So that is already in iOS 12 and shipping. The one thing I would love to see if this draft moves forwards, it would be nice for the client to be able to signal to the recursive resolver. I don't even want the 1.8 second delay.
Right.
If you have anything, give it to me now, and I'll keep the socket open. And if you get a better answer half a second from now, send me that as well, because I'll still be listening. And it's a contract that I'm saying, we're running happy eyeballs, so we don't need perfect answers. We're happy with fast answers, and we're willing to take corrections later. So I would love to see that.
Yeah, I personally like that idea. I have to talk it off with the co-authors, but I could see the possibility of that.
Yes, thank you.
So Mark Andrews is in the meeting, but I want to close the line. So
At the end.
at the end, yeah, at the end, Mark will.
Mark will end up.
Have,
Be the last
yeah, Mark will have the last. Thank you for
I'll be
speaking.
I'll be very quick. I just remembered one thing I wanted to add. The other thing, I don't know whether this is in some other RFC I maybe already written, but if not, as part of this document, maybe we could also discuss the cache refresh strategy before a record expires.
Yeah, that's in Hammer.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's covered a little bit. So one of the things that we made clear too is that originally the draft kind of suggested that every time you got a query, you should, you know, attempt to refresh the data. And then Ralph Weber, I believe, pointed out that, you know, well, if I just tried a second ago, it seems kind of silly to try again. And so between connection coalescing and query joining and prefetching and all, now the draft explicitly says, you know, you had to have had a recent effort to have refreshed the data.
So Andre Suri, IC. I don't work for a commercial big company, and I think this is a good idea. However, I would just drop the options. I don't think the options are a good idea because they have like security implications, like snooping, whether the attacker succeeded, cutting off the authoritative servers. So I would just drop the options. And the second thing is that I would rather not say 30 seconds and leave it up to the implementation and just recommend the default value.
Right.
Like in
They are just recommendations.
yeah. So I just remember it badly. I read it in the morning, but I think it's like it should be 30 seconds. And the last thing, you described a little bit unbound strategy in some section. It might be good to promote it like here's the other strategy how to do serve stale, and promote it like to equivalent to what you propose, maybe. I don't know, but I think this what Unbound does is equally good, and I think that it might be helpful to describe both strategies, how to approach the problem.
Wes Herdeker, ISI. A couple of things. I very much support this draft. My academic colleagues have recently shown that longer TTLs greatly limits your ability to, or greatly helps your ability under a service outage to keep operating without noticing a problem. And so that's protecting the end users, which anybody that knows me, I'm always speaking up for the end users first, because those are the people I care about the most. So it's not just a commercial opportunity. This is protecting the end users at ISPs. With respect to the EDNF zero options and things like that, my first question is, well, what would you do with that information if you got it? And if you can't really make a decent justification for, I would make a policy decision, then it's not worth the complexity to throw it in there. So I'd leave it out.
Right. So I'll agree on that basically. In that originally this was not even proposed with one, and then it was brought up by others saying that they'd like that diagnostic information. One thing that didn't make into the slides but came up in discussion at RIPE, in part because of this other feedback, was that what about systems that actually are depending on being able to get a failure answer? And so I asked the operator community, do you have actually any systems? I'm like, in these systems that I have that monitor the DNS, for example, outages would still be detectable completely independent of whether a stale answer came back from a recursive resolver. And so I reached out trying to find more evidence of these systems that were actually relying on TTL expiry to signal something significant to the monitoring of the system, and I have yet to hear it back. So
I would argue that most monitoring systems like that are querying the authoritative servers directly,
right,
not going through a recursive.
Exactly.
Yeah, and go back one slide and really quickly. So all of these values, look like great possible defaults, but I'm going to argue that the value doesn't make nearly as much sense in terms of importance as listing the engineering trade-offs or pros and cons of why you shouldn't go to this extreme and why you shouldn't go, too negative or, too small or too big. That will help individual deployments and individual implementations do the right thing for their users.
Sure.
Paul, just read that. So I think the serve state is a really good idea, and I also think that the options are a terrible idea. It's way too much complexity, and you cannot really do anything with it. So please remove the options, and everything is good.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Mukund from Infoblox. If you go back to that slide about TTL clamping or whatever, it was a previous slide. By the way, very nice presentation look. Okay, so RFC 2181 says that when the higher order bit is set, it should be treated as equal to 0, and now there's a proposal to treat it as max. And I feel it's possible that 2181 says it should be treated as 0 because possibly it assumes that a mistake has been made in setting the TTL so high. And so when you set it to 0, it means that whatever is going to use that record is going to refetch it next time. It's not going to cache it to something very, very high, like for a very long period of time. So it'll force a refetch by setting it to 0 rather than clamping it to something high again, 68 years again.
But the other implication of that is, in the presence of an error, all of a sudden now something that you actually meant to be cached for a long time is going to be constantly refreshed. So they're both pretty bad.
In the presence of an error?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But at least it'll be noticed rather than being cached for 68 years, which should be awful. So I agree that I think that the EDNS options are not required really. And I also agree with Andre's suggestion that it would be good to document the unbound model. This is something that I've been thinking about from a long time, because these ideas were, I don't know what the status is now, but these ideas were originally described as patented. And so I don't know if the unbound algorithm avoids those patents completely. But it would be good to have a different scheme in there, because it looks just as good. It does differ from your scheme that it doesn't attempt to do a resolution first, but still usable.
Hi, Giovanni, it's IDN. So thanks for the draft. I mean, we talked before DNS work about that, but just for the sake of the room here, if folks are interested to know how this thing works, actually there's some resolvers already deployed that they know why. I'm one of the co-authors that the study that Wes mentioned. And we found that on measurements in the early this year, using 10,000 RIPE Atlas probes, we found that roughly 200 already have service tail. And you can see that for yourself if you're interested. And if you see the results, I better get an answer, get no answer. And it works very well. So I think Google and OpenDNS are already deploying some versions of that, maybe other people now.
Yeah, and we actually cite Giovanni's paper in the draft too.
Oh, thanks.
This is Chris from Comcast, and speak up strongly support of serve stale. I think it makes things more reliable for the end users, and that's what I care about at least. And I think that the eDNS options make things more complicated and more difficult for people trying to use the DNS system. And I don't know that it's warranted in this particular case. I think there may be better and other ways for specific implementations to provide access to debugging information than using the eDNS system for that.
So I want to first give the mic to Mark. And if there's time, you can ask a question. I close the line after Mark. Okay. I did hit the button.
Hit it harder.
Harder. Keep it, but.
Well, while we're waiting for Mark to come up to the mic, I'll just point out for the next speakers that the air conditioning is blowing like right on here. Okay. If you saw me trembling a little, like I don't, I feel like I must be going through a metabolic flash or something like that, but I'm really cold up here. Well, while you're doing that.
Okay, Johan, go ahead.
So this is Johan again, NetNode. I need to fulfill the role of the skeptic, because I used to be in favor of this, and I think it's good if at least someone is not entirely in favor of it. And my view is that, yes, there is a problem to solve, the problem of how to continue to serve stuff to clients when we cannot get in contact with the authority for a while, and we need to find a solution to the problem. However, who is in the best position to know whether it's safe to serve this older data or not? And the answer is, that's the zone owner. And there's a signaling mechanism for this that we've had for eons, and it's called the TTL. So with a high TTL, there is no problem, except we don't use those high TTLs for another reason, which is that if we have a really high TTL on stuff, that stuff will stay in the cache for a very long time, and it's impossible to change that answer meanwhile. So at the tail end of your presentation, you spoke about cache refreshing strategies. And I think that's perhaps the better way of addressing the real problem. Go with long TTLs, but have a strategy for refreshing data in the cache that is queried for, so that the long TTL doesn't mean that we stay with the same answer for 2 weeks when it actually changes. So the problem is there. I'm just questioning whether this is the right strategy.
You got Mark?
No.
No, sorry.
Sorry, Mark.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark is going. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Mark, please go ahead.
Okay. Basically, we have two TTLs we need to deal with. One's the Surf Stale TTL, and the other is how often things need to be refreshed. We do have enough signaling, well, mechanisms to potentially signal from the authoritative to the recursive server how long answers should, so-called stale answers should be returned for. It wouldn't be a major change, though it would require using EDNS1 or something, or a similar mechanism to communicate that the client, that the recursive server supports a different form of resource record in its response.
So, Mark, do you see that, though, as a possible evolutionary stage to make things more explicit? Like, in the meantime, it's out in bind. I understand you were the one that did the integration into bind.
Yeah, I think if we don't, we should bite the bullet and go and actually do this at this stage. In terms of adding another field, it's easy enough to signal that the client supports an extra field. That's why we have EDNS. And you can we can create a default for clients which don't support this, based either on configuration or using the existing TTL value to say you don't support it. But we really should be giving the authorities the ability to say how long stale data should be served for, as well as how often we should be refreshing, which is basically what the TTL, the existing TTL is doing. It's the refresh time, as opposed to, especially for CDNs, as opposed to how long to serve this as in the case of an error condition.
Okay, I think we're way over time to dig more into that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So you might want to refresh
the slides for. Yeah, I will do that.
Oh, just go to 01.
Yeah.
We're going to do a little A-name sort of back and forth. Willem and Andre did some measurements, and I guess Andre's going to stand up and talk for a couple minutes, and I'm going to chat about Tony's updates as well as a couple other things. So he's not feeling well. Too much drinking? Is that what you're saying? No, you don't know.
Hi. Willem had to go because he's not feeling well, so you will have to look at me. This is Andre at ISC again, and this is like continuation of the experiment I did like last IETF hackathon, and this time Willem took over and ran some tests over the RIPE Atlas probes, testing the exactly same thing, and we have some results to present. So there's still the old draft, and Linnet Labs wants to quarter on the thing. And so again, the goal of the draft is like to map one name to another, including all the subdomains. So it's like the CNAME plus DNAME combination, but not in the apex. It's in the parent, because that works. The apex thing doesn't work, as I showed last time. So for some reason, we used the domain CNAME plus DNAME rogues before, but it's not completely broken with Google public DNS now. So it like destroyed all the results we got from RIPE Atlas. So so Willem registered a new domain. It just works. So we now tested the impact of the caching as well. So the CNAME and DNAME records had 1 hour TTL, and we did the tests in like the combinations, first CNAME, then DNAME, then we waited to for the records to expire, and then we did the DNAME and then CNAME to see, like in the hour window, to see how the cache is affecting this. So this is the result. So this is 17,000 resolvers on almost 10,000 probes, and the worst case scenario was the CNAME first and then DNAME. It's like it fails on 1% of the probes, and the best case was it fails on 0.5% of the probes. So this is really good because it shows that it could be. I know that the people running Atlas probes are probably more tech savvy than the usual people using the internet, but the experiment with the RIPE Atlas probes and the results clearly shows that this is something that could be like deployed right now, and no resolvers need to be updated. Only alternative DNS servers at the TLD level, which means also provisioning and stuff around this, needs to support it. And then, as Willem pointed out, NSD already does this as a slave. Bind can do this with like 5-line patch, and it could be incrementally deployed at TLD levels that works right now because it doesn't need any upgrade to the whole ecosystem. Just targeted where it should be targeted just at the TLDs or other places where you need this type of aliases. So that's it. This is the result of the experiments. So I think this is really, really nice.
Okay. We take questions after the A-name presentation of Tim.
Yep. Oh yeah, I'm back on this. So this is the soapbox I will not get off of. As an operator who has hundreds, if not thousands, of zones sitting on Route 53, I struggle with this on a regular basis. So we're looking at the user community. You know the problem, right? We need some fancy RR type there to sort of solve this sort of, this problem. We are in the world, we are living in the new world order of elastic compute. Okay, I think a lot of us see this as a DNS versus HTTP problem. I see this as an elastic compute issue. It's like this is all everybody does now, and we're all looking at elastic load balancers. We're all looking at some sort of fancy CDN thing. I don't see this as some HTTP versus DNS fight. I see this as how do we deal with this sort of elastic compute, sort of world order, and I don't see us really thinking of it in that regard, right? And they've done some good experiments on the CNAME DNAME thing. Ray's got a new draft about the HTTP record, which it looks like it has some, very interesting, it looks like it's getting some interesting traction, but I don't think we really care. I think we just need something because this is where we have to move forward on, right? How do we take all these zones that are sitting there? And I know Route 53, if you look at COM, it's probably got 500,000 zones sitting there, right? So how do you, how can I slave those, right? I can't do a lot of fancy things with them. So, and how do we get that transition plan? I'll work on the transition plan if we can get a solid RR type. And I know, and every vendor supports something different, right? So, every third-party vendor, and I know people go to, and as these people go to Bind and they say, we want this service. And you guys push back and say, we want something interoperable. So I know you guys are sort of fighting this. We haven't spent our support money on that. My employer, we spend our support money on getting DNSSEC stuff working better, right? So, but that would be the next thing we would do probably is go chase that. So Tony's did some updates on the A-name draft. I thought they were sort of very reasonable, but people still seem to have a lot of pushback on them. I know he's online. I'll just sort of, I spent some time reading this. It's like CNAME, but it's only for address records. We're not trying to do anything fancy here. And it's just behaving if you're doing basically the same thing if you're doing DNS updates. It's allowing resolvers to do the target address substitution. It's doing dynamic lookups on demand. if you want that. It's a little, people find it a little complicated. I know Ray feels it's super complicated, and I understand that. But you know, we're trying to figure out where to sort of put the simplistic, you know, I think Ray's comment was it needs to get out of the recursives and into the authoritative servers. Is that correct? The other way around, that's it. That's it. I knew I was going to say that wrong. I hadn't actually practiced that. Get it out of the authoritative servers into the recursive servers and let them do the math there. And that, I think, is really where everybody's trying to go with A-name. But we just haven't figured out how to sort of make that jump there. But we all do feel that this is sort of a, you know, we're all struggling with this on some level, but we see it as sort of different fights in different ways. And, you know, and maybe A-name's too complicated. I want Ray to get up and talk about his HTTP draft a little bit. So, yep. And because I do think it's, you keep, I think as we refine this problem, we're getting it to something that's very simple and very straightforward. Much like with serves tail, as we sort of winnow down the problem space, we get it to something simpler and simpler that's very easy to sort of say, oh yes, everybody can sort of buy into this. And I think we're getting here, I think Ray's draft is getting us closer to that space. So
right. Okay. Thanks, Ray Bellis, ISC, put on the spot. And apologies for not getting the draft out to the group sooner. It was something I've been thinking about for some time, and I've hoped to get some other co-authors on board since the side meeting we had in Montreal, but it didn't happen. So I thought, I had some spare time on Saturday, I thought, fine, let's get down and just write it. Actually, first comment, just going back to your previous slide about CNAME plus DNAME, that's, as far as I'm concerned, a completely different problem. Yep. I mean, it's utterly orthogonal. It's this,
exactly.
How do you make an entire domain equivalent to something else?
Yep.
It's just,
yeah,
I just want to make sure people aren't confused that that's something in this particular solution space for the CNAME at the apex, because it doesn't do that.
No, I think that solves like this, like, oh, I want dub, and you're not thinking about the rest of the, yes, you're not thinking about the rest of the zone sort of thing.
Well, it's more for the, yeah, like the IBM equivalents that were shown on Andre's slide. It's, yeah, how do I make this entire domain look like this other entire domain? So, yeah, the point with the HTTP record is that I think after the side meeting we had in Montreal, there was, I think, a sense that we could get some movement from the browser community if we were to go away from the SRV record. You know, they were clear that SRV has properties that they don't like, don't want. We haven't really heard so much from the CDN people on this, or the web hosting people, but one of the other problems with the SRV record is that it's no good for wildcards. And if you're a user of something like LiveJournal, you'll see they actually have a wildcard on livejournal.com so that you can use your username.livejournal.com as the address of your site. And I think, yeah, there are a lot of large web properties where not supporting wildcards would be a big problem for them. And of course, yeah, as soon as you start using underscore labels, you can't do that. They didn't like the fact that the port field is there. Priority field, a little bit, not so much for a problem. But ultimately, yeah, I've had some positive feedback from some web people saying, well, if there's a record that has exactly what we want, then maybe they can implement it. And the draft I've written is my attempt to do that. It requires, hopefully, minimal changes to browsers. I had some conversations yesterday about people who are saying, well, what about the long tail of embedded devices? I actually don't think those are going to be the problem, because this is primarily to solve that marketing issue of, I don't want www on the front of my URLs. And embedded devices doing DNS lookups are not typically going to be looking for those sort of marketing site type content. They're going to be looking for something deep down in the DNS structure where this record is not necessarily going to be required anyway. Yeah, they're not going to be looking for Apex records. In terms of the authoritative infrastructure, this requires no changes whatsoever. For provisioning, the R data looks exactly like a PTR record or a CNAME record. So if you've got a GoDaddy, manage my zone, the changes they would have to make to add this support for this record are, again, almost negligible.
Yep.
For the recursors, changes are, again, fairly small. There is an optional requirement, sorry, the contradiction terms there. There is an optional ability to allow the recursors to fill in the A and quad A records that are the target of the HTTP record. In part, that's there actually to simplify the application process, because if there was mandatory additional section processing in the record, then we wouldn't be able to go through expert review to apply for this record type. But since it's optional, that we can deploy it. And the only outstanding thing then is to have the browser support it. And I think hopefully there's some chance they will. I know they won't do SRV.
Yeah, they won't. No.
So,
yeah.
So that's my piece.
And just think, I just think of all the, the world of elastic compute, right? It's like, I just want some elastic load balancer on my zone, and that's all I care about, right? And it's going to move and change, and, all I get is a CNAME, right? All I get is a record that points to something else, kind of thing.
Yeah,
right.
We discussed yesterday the problem of Amazon Route 53. They have their alias record.
Yeah.
This is just a resource record as far as the proprietary service is concerned. If you're doing geolocation, then this would work equally well with the DNS client subnet as any other record would.
Yeah.
So it's
and this will still give us, that's the thing I like, is be able to sort of have something that could interoperate with all the other vendors' stuff, right? It's like, oh, we have this record plus all the, and because people need that path forward.
Yeah.
And then we can work on, outside of this, I'm working on those vendors to basically fall in line.
Yeah. I treat it as tautological that anything that does this in an authority layer is doing it in the wrong place in the DNS and is introducing significant complexity to the DNS. But unfortunately, the only way to put the complexity in the right place, and I think it is only a very tiny piece of complexity, is to have the browser vendors move a little bit towards us as well. But if we both move a little way towards each other, we can fix a whole load of problems of complexity that A-name and all the other hacks introduce. And that's my piece.
And not just browser vendors. Think of all the, these elastic things that are just API endpoints, right? They're just, things out there that people are just running, gets and posts against, right? Those are just, I see those as not even browser vendor stuff, right? They're just, it's the endpoints of the world that we all do now, right? So
that's my piece.
Yeah. So, okay. No other. I urge people to read Ray's draft, because actually I read it yesterday after, we sort of talked and settled some hash, and I thought, it's an interesting way to look at it, sort of thing. And so there's nobody on that. So that was all I wanted to say. I think, we really, as we sort of keep thinking about it, and we come to the realization we cannot just do SRV, because even I refuse to accept SRV, and so we'll find a better solution. So, okay, that was all we had to say about that. That's
all you had to say.
Okay, good.
Wes Herdiger, ISI. The one thing that concerns me about the past 10 minutes of conversation is that we need to make sure that we're forward-looking enough. And the reality is that this problem is going to come back and bite us again in the future. I mean, it's great if we solve it for HTTP and we come up with some solution that works for that. But the reality is, I don't want to go back to the days of the news anchors, saying, okay, please type into your browsers http://// and that's what led us here, right? Is if the users don't really care, they have some application, they need to type in foo.com, and that's where they need to go. As much as we would prefer that users type www every time, because that indicates the service they want to go to, the reality is they won't. And if we don't solve that generically, now, we're going to get hit with it again when newfangled protocol X needs.
We have to solve both the backwards problem and the forwards problem, right? That's why I'm not crazy about HTTP as a name type, because of that, because something else is going to come up that's going to replace that, right? Like, soon there'll be an API, RR type, because everybody's just going to do. Yeah, so, but yes, I do agree. We do need to be more forward-looking and being ready to react quicker when we start seeing the industry change in certain ways, right? Because elastic compute is like the first step, but now, my employer is building these giant multi-substrate, public cloud, compute cloud things. And it's like, well, how do you sort of, that's like the next step in the whole generation, right? Instead of just doing AWS in multiple regions, you're doing Google and AWS in multiple regions, and you're doing this fancy stuff that sort of shifts traffic around. How do you describe all that, right? Because that's going to be the next step in the whole process.
Okay, Tim, there's Mark Andrews in the meeting.
Of course.
Very brief, Mark.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. As far as Tim, SRV and setting to port 0 is effectively the same as the HTTP record. That is one-way future. The other thing in terms of future is we've got to make sure that we actually don't make types class independent. It's at the moment we allocating types and people are making them class independent, and we've got plenty of space if we don't do that by default. So we've got plenty of way forward, and for many applications, SRV is perfectly fine too. So I don't think there's a big problem here. It's more an education problem than anything else, for people to choose a solution that works.
But they're not going to choose SRV, so we have to choose. We have to come up with something better.
Well, the HTTP people believe that SRV doesn't work.
Well, I don't like it. I personally don't like it.
What don't you like about it?
It's like, oh, what's the order of the the R data? I've got to put the port in the priority, or is it the priority and the port and the wait? It's like it's like wait, I'm trying to do this in the middle of the night and I can't remember. It's like like I'm going senile and like yeah. So I'm a simple man, Mark. I'm
And a 2-second lookup to find the answer. Yeah.
Wes Hardiker, ISI, channeling the good fairy that was whispering into my ear rightfully. We had discussions a while back about things like multiple responses and ways of including additional information so that all those round trips kind of go away and you get the right information. That seems like it would kind of help in this scenario to a large extent.
No, I think those are, Okay. And there was a couple of interesting proposals about that. I think you guys had one, and I know Ray had a very interesting one too. Yep.
Well,
so
we're running late. So.
Okay. So
one last.
My chair's going to cut my mic. Okay.
One last comment.
Yeah. So I do have a multiple queue types draft, and that's actually another reason why this is using a new record type. Because we had SRV record with an underscore prefix, you couldn't do that with multiple queue types. But you could ask for A, quad A, and HTTP all in one query with the multiple queue types draft.
Yep. Okay.
Dan, very brief.
Actually, I sent comments to Liz.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. So I'm getting cut off by my chair, so I'll go sit down. Mr. Hoffman? Now for the Mr. Hoffman section. The Mr. Hoffman section of the meeting. No. Yeah, I did that on. This is the first one. I did that on purpose.
And you're the only one who calls me Mr. So, for those of you who have forgotten, we had RFC 7816, which was how to do QNAME minimization or query minimization, whatever you want to call it. That's been out for a while. That's an experimental document. That was from Stefan Bortsmeyer. I talked to Stefan at a previous IETF and said, look, let's get this out of experimental. He said, sure. We brought it up, came to the working group. So Stefan and I published the 01 back in September, basically just sucking up the RFC and sticking it into a new draft and then putting questions. Everything that is in this BIS draft is, the technical parts are the same, which is that we don't say you must do QNAME minimization this way, but we describe one way to do it, which is at a should level, which is another reason why it's not experimental. And for those of you who've forgotten, because a lot of people do get confused with it, QNAME minimization from the draft is you set the Q type to NS and you use the once little shortened name. One of the problems with QNAME minimization and the reason why the working group made it experimental the first time around is this doesn't always work. Some load balancers get in the way, some middle boxes get in the way. You might get back an obviously wrong answer. So that leads us to the changes we're going to make in the RFC. So it will be standards track, or that's our current plan. The working group can always reverse that, but we figured the experiment has worked pretty well. We want to talk about how specific resolvers have implemented this, especially about the fallbacks. We might list more fallbacks, we might list less, we might hopefully get some. What would be optimal is one of the resolver vendors say, we did QNAME minimization with this kind of fallback, and that fallback sucked for this reason, so now we've switched to another one. We would love to have negative examples because the fallback stuff gets very complicated, but we will come up with more discussion of fallbacks. We might even have a recommended one. Getting a recommendation out of this working group when we don't have any empirical evidence is sort of hard. On the other hand, QNAME minimization is something that's very easy to test. So the research folks in the room might even start running some, let's do it with this fallback, and now run over the same queries again with this different fallback and do that. That would be very cool. The current way that that RFC 7816 was written really was, since he knew it was going to be experimental, he made it experimental throughout, and since we're going for not experimental, we'll sort of rip that out. And then, so what's next is we would love more review on it. We especially want review from any implementers who did QNAME minimization in their current resolvers. Again, not just we did this and it worked, we would love to hear we did this and it didn't work, or we did this and it wasn't clear that it was going to work, so we did something else. That kind of thing would be very valuable for this document, since we know that the protocol that we are proposing doesn't work all the time. We want a document that in the end will be convincing to somebody to say, I should implement this way because it's going to, give the best benefit. QNAME minimization at this point is our only way of getting user privacy between the resolvers and the authoritative. Deprive is far behind on doing that, got canceled for this week. QNAME minimization is really what is helping now. We would love to get that as good as we can, because quite frankly, even if Deprive comes out, the Deprive working group comes out with a way of doing encryption between the authoritative and the recursors, not everyone's going to implement that. There will definitely be authoritatives who will go like, you know what, this is too much effort for us or whatever. So QNAME minimization also gives privacy. It's orthogonal. So far, it's worked out pretty well. So that's where we're at. We'll do another draft before the end of the year, but not one that's like anywhere near done. The more we hear from you folks, and we would love to hear on the list. We've been getting a few little private notes. Saying things on the list gets it so that the other vendors can look at it and say, oh, we had that problem too, or oh, we didn't have that. So that's it.
Thank you. Any questions?
Can you go back?
Can I actually have a question from Shara? Can I go back?
Right there. Okay.
Oh.
Go back. Go forward.
Yep.
That's actually a good list of stuff we should try to track in the working group.
Yes.
Yep. As sort of, know, and as sort of bullet points, is sort of like,
right.
Yep.
We are trying to do this.
Okay.
And those are the major ones. There will be minor ones, but the major one is we really need to do the fallback stuff and get implementation experience. Okay. A man with implementation experience.
So this is Andre Suri, ISC again. So for Bind, Open Technology Fund has sponsored implementation of the QNAME minimization in Bind 9.13, which will become stable as Bind.14 next January. So I'll send you the engineer responsible for implementing the QNAME minimization your way to add to our implementation experience. And and if you haunt me enough, I will also personally provide the comments, because I have some. But I'm busy with preparing the release, so it might be difficult.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Petr Špaček, CZNIC. I have basically the same comment. If you have some research,
except for a different resolver.
For a different resolver. Yeah, exactly.
If you're talking for Bind 9.14, I have some questions for you.
No. We have QNAME minimization on by default for 2 years at least, or maybe even longer, and it kind of works. If you have some researcher willing to look at it, send him my way. We have some data sets, some workarounds, and so on. That's it.
So are there researchers or researchy type people in the room who are looking for a cool thing that you can do that would have reproducibility? We're not big on that in this world, but this is a perfect one where you could have reproducibility. So
yeah, be careful with statement like that. It's DNS.
Well, I'm sorry. Better reproducibility than what we're used to. So, great, thanks.
Ralph Wilmans, and from yet another implementation. We enabled QNAM minimization by default quite some time ago, and it seems to work.
I didn't realize you were by default.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
And it seems to work with the fallbacks we have, so I'm happy to share how we did it.
Fallbacks plural that you have, or a
Yes.
single? Okay, great.
Plural.
So having that list and having that would be excellent for the document.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm up next, so.
Yeah. Thanks. Next up.
Okay, there you go. So shifting hats, this is another BIS, but it's a very different flavored BIS. This was 7706, which Warren and I did. Actually, Warren did much of it. I came in at the end. I flew in and helped get it fixed, but it was sort of Warren's idea. This one is getting a lot of changes. The previous one was like, okay, let's just take it from experimental standard. Now that we have a lot of experience with 7706, which is about running a root server on local host, blah, 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 we've gotten a lot of responses from people saying, I liked that idea. I did it sort of differently, where sort of means massively, sometimes cryptically so and such like that. So for this document, we're actually trying to match current reality, which is as we were in the last document, but that's taking a larger step. Also, people are saying, this is working so well, but since the last one was full of please don't do this, which we put in because some people were like, oh, this is going to be terrible, and yet a lot of people are using it, we're actually going to come into a reality where we're saying, you might want to do this way or this way, and here are many ways that people are doing it. So we put out the 01 in October. Just to be really clear, there's a lot left to do on this. One of the main things that we've heard is because the original document said you had to run the root server on localhost, and yet one of our major examples didn't run it on localhost. Whoops! Sort of bad when like your major example doesn't match the title of the document. So we are changing that to talk about running on the same host. Ray, stay seated. You come up on the next slide. There's been a lot of agreement that in the implementations that were like this, they didn't have to run on localhost. They could just run on the same server. All of our examples are now badly out of date. I think almost everybody I know from ISC has pointed out that the ones that we have are EOL, and we shouldn't be talking about EOL and stuff like that. And okay. We also want to talk about services, not just this is how you do this. Wes has a service out there that does this, and he's been getting some results, and I'm expecting Wes to tell us more about the kind of results he's getting and such like that. But the idea here is that if you are going to be wanting a copy of the local of the root zone on your local server, and you're doing, the one thing that we emphasize in 7706 is if you're doing DNSSEC validation, you could get that from anywhere. You could get it from a I mean, it's hard to do a copy of the root zone on chalkboard, but you could get it from many places. You don't need to get it from the small list that we gave you in the document. And in fact, for people who remember how 7706 came about, we actually were listing more services where you could get the root zone that ended up in the RFC. We actually ripped a few out at the last moment. Since then, more people are saying, I've got this. Some of the implementations out there are doing differently. So we have a lot of work to do. One of the questions that we need to answer that's been on the list in the last couple of weeks is whether that root server that we're talking about has to be on the local machine, and if not, are all the responses going to be the same? That's a pretty controversial discussion. We don't need to have it at Mike today, but I want Ray to bring it up because you were the one who had been advocating for this. We also want to make the use cases clearer because we got boxed into a title for 7706, which is wrong about localhost, but it's also wrong about why some people want this. We said for speed, but in fact, most of the people we talk to say, you know what, 2 extra milliseconds isn't a big deal, but we want it for stability. That is, if the root zone that we are talking to right now is under attack, or we've been cut off by it and something like that, We want this so that the responses are, that we have a more stable connection to the root zone information. So we need to reword a lot of stuff to match that. What we don't have in 7706, because we were boxed into this, is what if this fails? You obviously want to start talking to the real root again. We don't talk about that nearly as much as we should from 7706. We're going to need to be adding to do this. Humorously, it's a little bit hard to tell that because, for example, some resolvers will have 2 or 3 of the, the 13 roots ready to go. And so if you're talking to one of them and you're not hearing anything back, that doesn't mean you need to completely fall back. That means you should go to another one, such like that. There will be a lot added there. I think that will be, ripe for, heavy discussion and such like that. So we will have a draft before the end of the year with some of this included, but we are assuming it's going to take the better part of next year before we get working group consensus on this. So that's it for me.
Okay.
Sometimes people ask that.
Can we go? Okay.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mukund. So, firstly, what this draft proposes is a fine idea. It's good to have. So, the number of resolvers will probably, in this age of DNSSEC, we want more resolvers that are closer to you, so that you can trust the answers you're getting from the resolvers. Now, this idea, I don't know if how well it's going to scale, because if every resolver is going to run this, then every resolver is going to need a copy of the root zone. Also, I see a DNS enthusiast running something like this, and I also see a large-scale DNS operator, like a public DNS service, running this. But I don't see something like a school, for example, which is running off-the-shelf resolver, running something like this, because this also, the draft also recommends that this needs to be managed and tested, that the root service is, the root zone is updating properly, etc. So, and also things like CPE CPE appliances. I don't know if they will, it'll be possible
they might not run it. This isn't saying that this is the way to do DNS.
So, yeah, so there are other ways, I think, where something of this sort can be achieved, where there's more resilience for accessing the root service. And I want to bring to attention an idea by Paul Vixie, which is to have a root server IP address running on something like a AS112 service, where basically anybody can host a root server, and your ISP can host a root server. And so there's resilience there, and you can replicate exactly this draft in the same way by
not at all exactly this draft. So that's quite a different theory to get to the same answer. I would propose, if you wanted to do that, write a separate draft soon, because like I said, we're not close to done on this, and that could be, an alternative.
You could have a copy of the root zone on one of those, something similar to a black hole .inr address on your local network, if you want to, and validate. It'll be just any other root server. But the advantage there is that you don't have to touch resolvers. Like existing resolvers will work with such a, as long as you update the hints file, existing resolvers.
Right, that's a massive change. I suggest that you would need to write that down. I don't think that's a simple delta to this or 7706.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean it as an update to this draft.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I thought we were talking. Okay.
This is another idea that I would think would have it would be more advantageous to have.
Right.
It's by Vixie, actually.
And you have time, but yeah, write it up and let's see if that gets more traction. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm closing the line after Dan.
Wes Redeker, ISI. I'm glad to see this is going forward as a standards track document. I think it's well earned its right to do so, and that we're removing all the barriers to actually being able to use it that were the wording that was stuck into the first ones. A couple of things. The whole issue of whether it should only run on localhost or private address space or maybe in a resolver. I think the bigger thing is might be to state what you shouldn't do, right? You shouldn't create routes, you know, outward, that you should really only be advertising the service to the clients that you already are supporting resolution for, or something like that. That's the easiest way to around that particular problem. You mentioned local route, so I appreciate your advertising that. I have been running that. I won't describe it here, but if you go to localroute.isi.edu, it spits out bind config at the moment and helps you walk through doing this if you want to do it locally. One thing that I will mention is I mentioned, I gave a presentation both at NDSS this year on the DNS privacy workshop, and at MapRG earlier this year in March, if you want to go back and look at the archives, where I showed between these two drafts, right, you had one on 7706 and the previous one was on query minimization. I showed that this is more secure. It gives you more privacy to do this than it does, because I succeeded in doing timing analysis and some other attacks against stuff that query minimization wouldn't help you with.
I had forgotten that paper. Can you make sure to send it to me? Because that certainly should be in the references.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I'd be happy to. So, and there's multiple presentations about it as well. The other thing to note is that there's been significant support when I was implementing local route. You know, I was advertising to various root server operators, hey, I want to do this. You know, who supports transfers? A number of root server operators turned on transfer support specifically in support of 7706. And I think that that alone is a testament to this is possibly a good idea to really help decrease the load on the routes.
Great, thanks.
This is Andre, I see. In the draft, you have an example of if all version bind, but that's fine. That hasn't changed up until now.
Okay, so now everyone has done it. Great. Okay, cool.
Up until now, where actually ICANN has sponsored, you see a pattern here, the development of the local copy of the read zone, which will be in bind 9.14, and we actually call it mirror zones, and it's not limited to the root.
Right.
So I'm not sure if this should be specified in the document, but it's one of the things that I've been already approached by, I think you, him,
right,
about doing this for a TTLD level.
Yep.
So
I would like to leave this for the root for now, but I certainly don't want to preclude anybody. And if before we're done, if that seems more live, sure, because it's the exact same ideas.
So, and we'll send you examples how to do it in bind 9.13 and up.
Great.
Because it's like, we call it like, instead of slay zone, it's mirror zone.
Yeah.
It behaves a little bit differently.
Yep. Thanks. Oh, and by the way, if we have wording in here that looks like it precludes non-root zones, please point that out to me, because I do want us to be able to swap in at the end for other zones if they come up.
Yeah, in fact, I using an NSD and Unbound, I'm mirroring ARPA and Inadder,
okay,
which are both slavable and signed and pretty busy.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, something that came up in Barcelona about, oh, you can get your zone from anywhere. You know that it is true, but you don't know that you don't know whether it's stale.
Right.
And I forget. Do you say anything about that?
We don't say anything here. We've been hearing that a lot of, I'd like to get my root zone from somebody who I have a service level agreement with, you know, something like that. So that, and possibly to get updates. I mean, one of the things on that is that, like, for example, Wes's service sends out updates.
Yeah.
So maybe you want that, but yeah. Yeah, you could take it from anybody, but you don't know how recent it is.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I realize far be it from any of us to tell the root server operators what to do, but if they're no, but if they're providing,
where's my 10-foot pole here? That's right.
No, I'm just wondering if if you're providing copies of the root intended for this thing, it might be nice to have like the signatures expire relatively soon, so you know that it's stale.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we don't have anything about that in the document. We might or we might not, but certainly services that are thinking of this are doing that.
So currently this draft is sort of having two entities. One is the authoritative part and one is the resolver part. I mean, wouldn't it also be an idea to just move that transferring of the zone and using that right into the resolver? And this is what Andre was talking about? I'm sure.
So no, it's actually not exactly what Andre was talking about, because one of the reasons you don't just move it straight into your cache is you're going to give answers with different flags on them then. This is a way for the resolver to know that it's asking somebody that thinks that they're going to answer like a root. And that is actually covered in the draft.
So this would kind of then exclude kind of resolvers that try to do that themselves. And I mean, just of course, we need to
It
switch
doesn't
back to
prohibit them, but it doesn't support them in this document. In this document, we want the resolvers to be getting answers that look like an answer they would have gotten from the root, especially if they need to fall back. We don't want all of a sudden the, one of the bits in the header to change. We want it to all be, yes, this is just like I'm talking to the root.
And would you be open to kind of evolve it to a way where the resolver can sort of do that in itself?
Maybe. I'm not that interested in it, but if the working group is, absolutely. Sure. So you can bring that up. I would want you to work it out first, but yeah, you can definitely bring that up. Because it is sort of easier to have one cache, right? So, yeah.
Petr Špaček, season Nick. It's funny because I have basically the same comment. I would like the document to be less restrictive because, for example, in Not Resolver, we have implementation of something which is definitely not 7706, but is doing the same, it's going in the same direction, doing basically the same service for the user, but it's completely different implementation.
Okay.
So I think that most value of the document is in saying, okay, don't do this because it will break this, or never ever do this and always do this and something in the middle, right?
Yep.
So I think that prescribing how it should be implemented, like doing zone transfer. Why? I mean, maybe I'm getting the zone from BitTorrent or I don't know, something.
Yeah,
It's
we definitely don't want to specify that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay. But the question that Ralph was asking, I think that what you're saying is also then you as a resolver, how do you respond to things like that? Maybe we even loosen up on that. But like I say, I would want to see specific recommendations saying, if you do it this way, these bits are going to change and that's okay. Because I certainly remember us having this argument, before 7706 of whatever you do has to look bit for bit in the responses. Maybe that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, let's discuss on Monday.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Dan York, channeling Tony Finch. Do we really need this if we have NSEC negative answer synthesis plus prefetching plus serve stale?
Yes, because you don't get anything else from the root that's not signed. So we could change, so aggressive prefetching, which we don't have yet, could probably get you the entire root. And that's a thought. I think getting the root zone all at once is a heck of a lot easier than that. So yes, if you know all of the right queries to get the information of the root, then you don't need to have gotten the root from somewhere else. So yeah, okay.
So sorry, I did close the line, but I think Petr wants to give a comment on this specific question, and then it's really closed. Very small, really very okay.
Yeah. So answer for Tony Finch. We have explored this idea to basically walking through the root zone in the not resolver, and we found out it's way more efficient to get the zone in bulk. It's like 1/10 of the packets or something between the root, and so it's more efficient. And I mean, why not? It's just easier to implement as well.
Okay, great, thanks.
And since I was standing there, I was going to just throw one more comment from me, Dan York, and that Paul too. I would just say for people to be aware. I think at the ICANN meeting in the DNSSEC workshop and others, this is also what some of the people there were calling hyperlocal root hosting, or so they had a name like that.
Hyperlocal is a phrase that we've been throwing around ICANN for something like this, but we actually haven't put it out to the community yet, so we aren't saying this is like hyperlocal. Hyperlocal looks somewhat like this, but so does Wes's thing. Until we actually fix that with the community, we don't want to be using that term.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Brian Dixon, GoDaddy. One thing about the ideas here, and may even be applicable to the serve stale, is notify. If you have the ability to anonymously subscribe, notify gets you the ability to have a long TTL and get update.
Yep, exactly right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Alexander. Yes.
So Tim, while Alex is getting up there, Dan York again. I had a question. What's the resolution of the A-name discussion there that we had in terms of what are the next steps in your mind?
Yeah. I'll make it quick. Get people to read the HTTP draft and see if we can sort of focus in a good direction. I don't think there's a real resolution other than we've got to keep sort of narrowing that, sort of getting it down to a simpler and simpler problem that we can sort of, much like serve stale, where the more we remove this, it's like, oh, this looks great, sort of thing.
Okay, my comment would just be that the A-name draft and the HTTP draft are two different
things. Yeah,
So,
I think A-name needs some better, more reviews, and I think people need to sort of look at the HTTP and kind of, let's look at those. And Wes's idea of we've got to make sure we don't bind ourselves, going forward as well. We have to solve the backward problem. We have to solve the forward problem too.
Okay. Yeah, I think we just need to figure out a solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe most importantly, can we get browser people to read the HTTP draft and say, is it enough, or
Exactly.
That's the important question here. We can read whatever we want.
We'll work on that with some of the browser chairs and stuff, as well as Ray's had some comments. Okay, we'll do our work.
Yeah. And these are all complementary solutions that address one specific problem we discuss in this room. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. So next up, it's something that's a little bit farther away maybe from Dnsop, but it's definitely connected to the DNS. So that's a draft I did together with a colleague of mine, with Dimitri Klesev, and with Marcus Sabatello, local guy from another company. So the background to this is, it's about blockchains and connecting blockchains to the DNS, or rather distributed ledgers, because people don't like to say blockchains anymore, because it doesn't look like business. So those distributed ledgers typically use addresses to identify resources which look like, that string on the first bullet there. So, and there's a little bit of problem with interoperability with those addresses, because, well, first, they are not human readable, as it's quite clear. And those addresses also lack identification of the actual distributed ledger they are on in most cases. So you have no idea whether that's a Bitcoin address or a sovereign address or whatever. So that's definitely a combination of usability and an interoperability problem. And if you ever saw on your computer something like on the bottom right, it's actually quite hard work to type the ET address on the different computer to finally get access to your data again, or not. Yeah. So that's not really suitable for identification, and it's not practical either. We are DNS people, so the first byte reflex, of course, is, well, let's put it into the DNS. Yeah, so it does connect it with a human-friendly name, it's globally available, yada, yada, yada. So it's quite the first thing that people think about, especially if they work in the DNS industry. And then it turned out, well, how we do that exactly? So do we do it as a TXT record? Do we look at the dedicated RR type for that? Or could we create a new class where we put all the distributed ledgers into a block class or whatever? And also, how does the owner name of those records, the host name structure, look like? And of course, an important consideration to this is that we have, of course, the exhibit A, the poor but still smiling camel. On the left-hand side, we have exhibit B, which is let's put it into the DNS draft. And in the middle, we have you and me, sort of like defending the camel against the attack by the drafts. So having considered that, we looked at how can we make that connection between the decentralized identifiers and the DNS in a way so that it has as little impact as possible on the DNS camel. Let me put it that way. And fortunately, there is ongoing work in the WC3. Right now, it's in a community group, but as I understand, it's upgraded to a working group, which has created the definition of a URI scheme that's called DID, Decentralized Identifier, which is a hierarchical scheme and allows you to add addresses for distributed ledgers into a URI. That does definitely solve the problem of interoperability, because now it's very easy to actually identify which distributed ledger a certain address is contained in. Still, it doesn't really serve the usability problem, because that's still like nothing that's really human readable. So, but fortunately, there is some work that came out of a very late stage of the enum work, if you still remember that, which is the DNS URI RR type. So we got a URI scheme for those addresses. We got a URI scheme we got an RR type that allows you to add a generic URI into a DNS record. However, we started putting this together into a draft. That's the name of the draft. And that's essentially the one-line hello world example. So we did define _DID as an owner name. And as easy as that, it's a classical URI DNS RR type with the distributed identifier as a content of the record. And looking at this from the point of the camel load, if you want me to put it that way, we're actually quite good. So we are set with the existing RR type. We are set with an existing owner name definition, which is in RFC 7553. We also, for the mapping from an email address to a distributed ledger address, there's something in RFC 7929, which is DANE for OpenBGP. It's experimental, but essentially it creates a hash out of the email address and uses that as an owner name. So we're using that as well. It's also in an RFC. And for the service parameter, for the _DID, there is actually an existing IANA registry that registers those names. However, that's where we actually ran into a problem, and that's why we started the draft in the first place, because an entry in the IANA registry requires either a protocol that's sort of like connected to a port number, yeah, TCP or UDP port, or an enum service. And the thing that we are trying to achieve doesn't fall in either of those two categories. So the current boilerplate solution to that is that we are saying we are updating the DNS URI RR type to allow a third category besides the port, besides the service parameter register and the enum service, and that is right now it's the fixed _DID string. Yeah. We have running code for this. So that's a software that's called UniResolver. It's Universal Resolver for the decentralized identifiers. And that has been updated already to do a DNS query for a name that you enter there and resolve the DNS URI RR type, and then go out and resolve the actual resource on the distributed ledger. So running code was actually very simple because it's pretty straightforward. It didn't require any changes on the DNS infrastructure of the host that runs the Universal Resolver. You just need to parse the DNS RR type. So the question is, how do we proceed? I'm not really super happy with the idea of updating RFC 7553. The easiest would be if we could sort of like add a protocol independent string into the service parameter registry. And so I went out to ask IANA about this. And I just got the information today because I didn't look at that email in the right point. IANA went out to the experts who actually run that registry, and they said, well, it's neither a service parameter nor an enum service, but they're also not sure whether updating the definition of that RFC is the right thing. So the next part is like, we're going to talk to the transport area directors because the service parameter registry is under their wings. So I've asked the area directors to talk to have a talk with them about that. The question is, what do we do with the draft? Actually, the reason why the draft exists is because we need to like squeeze in that service parameter into the service parameter registry or get that name allocated. for what we are trying to achieve. Otherwise, it's like pretty transparent. It's just an application of the DNS. Yeah. So my question to the group, how shall we proceed with the document? Is it interesting to the community? I know it's a little bit farther away from the typical Dnsop stuff than usual. And I'm going to talk again about it tomorrow at the Decentralized Internet Infrastructure Research Group, if you want to hear more about the use case for that.
Hi, Jim Mead. I think it's a good idea. I think we should try to move forward with it, Alex. I'm kind of having flashbacks to some problems back to the enum days before. There was an attempt we tried to do about 10 years ago to get a tight code assignment done or something similar to that service parameter or an enum service done for terminating calls, and that ran into trouble with the area directors at the time, so they refused to actually do that for us, even though there was a valid use case for it. So I think a conversation with the transport area directors, if they're now in charge of this IANA registry, I think that'd be a very, very good thing to do. And I think if you're going to do that, please be careful how you articulate this to them so it's clearly understood there's a genuine need for it, just in case there's a misunderstanding and then you repeat the mistakes that we went through all those years ago. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Paul. Yeah. Paul Hoffman.
So this presentation won't use the word blockchain. Well, draft name, just in case you want to look at it. Notice this is still a draft, individual draft. A couple months ago, someone was saying, gosh, someone should have a registry so that we know what all these underscore labels are. And the working group chair said, well, who wants to volunteer? And I put up my hand and they said, okay. So I published a 00, and it's a pretty incomplete 00, but I thought, you know, okay, I fulfilled my duty. And so nothing has been said about it since. Just to be clear, so what was asked for, and I think I got in the document reasonably well, is a new IANA registry for special labels. Remember, not all special labels have an underscore, and not all special labels exist on the far left-hand side. And the reason why this registry is useful is that if you write a resolver, if you write any of the things that need to know about a special label, and you are smart enough to actually look at this registry, you're likely to trip over other things that you wish you had known about at other times. I mean, this is really one of the real good uses of a registry. It's not like you're going to look in this registry all the time, but if you're looking in the registry, you're going to see things that are related to what you're doing now. So I can do a more complete draft if people want. We can see whether it's interesting or not. This is like a fairly low-key thing. You know, if people want it as a working group item, it's fine. I don't actually start listing them all. There's lots of holes there, but I just wanted to, you know, enough people said, oh, that'd be nice if, where I wanted something where people can say, yes, I want it like that. Or, you know what, I was just sort of blabbling about what I wanted someone else to do. We don't really care. That's it.
Any
Well, I mean,
comments?
we should mostly do that on the list, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So,
Okay.
but I'll try to do another draft with fewer open holes. Oh, wait, people are showing interest of positive or negative, yeah.
Thank you for doing this, but it's so boring.
It really is.
So thank you.
I've done worse, but yeah.
More support.
In general, in general, IS implementer think it's useful, especially for new folks who haven't seen the RFCs which introduce special labels in making. But yeah, it's just boring. So
yeah. And I humorously, after I started this, and I've been working on another draft, which I might have time for at the end or not, it actually creates special labels. And I'm like, no one would have guessed this unless there was a registry. So it might be useful for that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Ladislav Lotka on young types for DNS classes. Oh, sorry. Oh, and Peter Spacek.
Hi, I'm Adil Hutka, and Petr Spacek is the co-author of this draft, and this work is really about configuration and management of DNS servers and resolvers. And our primary aim is to sort of kick off or perhaps restart some work on Yang data modeling of this DNS stuff. And we would like to show some running code as soon as possible. We have been working on something, and Peter got some preliminary results during the hackathon last weekend. So maybe we thought it would be useful to start with the information about the direction where this could lead to potentially.
Thank you. So short intro, basically, the known problem is, right, every single DNS server has different configuration. It's nightmare if you have multiple implementations. There were attempts in the past to standardize. It went horribly, and there was nothing which actually worked. During this hackathon, we spent some time on actually coding. So we have running code which can configure or add and delete zone. I have to be precise. Bind NSD and not DNS using the same API. It seems that the idea itself is fine. It's not that hard to implement. And basically the hardest part is the configuration APIs in the DNS server. So it's basically Yang, RESTconf, netconf. We can ignore that because the implementation problems are in the configuration APIs, which are, can be used for anything, even if we ignore all the upper layers in the protocol stack. So the takeaway is, yeah, it seems that it's fine idea, it works, and this draft is super basic building block, and we actually have more running code than the draft describes. That's what I want to say.
Right, so this is just the very first step, and the obvious place where to start is to translate INR registries dealing with DNS parameters and translate them into Yang types, because that's the only way how they can be used in Yang. And the natural start is this domain name systems parameters, which is an INR document or web page containing as many as 13 INR registries. And we actually implemented only the first two that are in boldface. This can be discussed, but we thought that the other registries may be useful only for very special purposes, and some of them perhaps are pretty much useless at this moment. So we only did the first two, and so the result is this Yang module that contains derived Yang types for those two registries, DNS classes and RR types. And the idea is that this will only be an initial revision of the module, and later on it will be maintained by INR. So each time the registry is changed, a new entry is added, INR will also update this module. So it will be then completely maintained by INR, and the draft contains instructions about how to do that in the INR configurations section. Now about the design of the type. So basically it worked the same for DNS classes and RR types. This is an example for RR types. So first we define a derived type that just mirrors the INR registry. It means it gives the names of, or as enums, as Yang enums, all the names, mnemonic names of RR types, also the value that's specified in the registry, and the description and a reference that's there as well. So this is quite a long enumeration, and contains all the types that are in the registry. And then we define a second derived type that is basically a union, and this type enables a data modeler to use either the mnemonic name or the number that's assigned to that RR type. So for example, AAAA type and the number 28 mean the same thing. And it's quite similar to what RFC 3597 provides. It means to be able to specify the RR type number instead of the mnemonic name. And it's done the same way for DNS classes. And now, as last point, there are other INR registries related to DNS contained in a number of INR documents, and each of the documents contains one or more registries. In this case, all of these registries are sort of focused so that it makes sense probably to create Yang modules for a Yang module for each of these topics, covering one or more registries if necessary. So that's what we want to do in the near future if there is any interest in this work. So I would like to solicit comments for this work, and if there is some interest, we would like to get this work adopted as a working group item.
Thank you. Any interest in the group here? Maybe people know in companies, organizations that are interested in deploying Yang.
So this is Andre at ISC. I didn't get one thing from the draft. Who will be doing this update? So if I'm writing a draft, if a new resource record type, after this is in effect, will it be my responsibility to edit like to the IANA section, or IANA will do this automatically, so it will be more work for IANA, or? Like,
I think this is explained in the IANA consideration section, and we have a good example of a similar registry, namely IANA interface types. This document has been, it's RFC, I don't know the number, but the idea is that IANA will maintain this module, so this module will never be updated manually, and after an entry is added to the registry, IANA will be responsible for updating the module in the way that's indicated in the IANA consideration sections. So it means adding a new enum for all the parameters.
So it doesn't affect the DNSOP work at all?
No, only this is, as I said, this is only an initial revision of this module. So this will be submitted. It could become an RFC later, and then IANA will take over the maintenance of this.
Okay, I don't care.
Ian Farrer. Yeah, just a general vote of support for the work. I mean, we as Deutsche Telekom are very interested in this and will be using it when it arrives and hope to be able to contribute to it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Wes Hardiker, ISI. I think this is definitely a good thing to go forward, and you know, the more we have structs and enums available to us, the more likely code will get written. That being said, there have been other implementations in the past, both in NetConf and in other management protocols that failed to get off the ground. So it's great that you got work done in the hackathon. I will point out RFC 6168, which is management considerations for DNS. I don't remember what it stands for. I don't remember the title, but basically it's a group of 20, 25 people that sat around in the room and tried to discuss requirements for what it takes to manage DNS software, and that may be worth looking into.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I would suggest to collect more feedback from the working group, make another iteration on the mailing list indeed, make another iteration of the document and continue. Thank you.
So it looks like
we're good in time.
Yeah, so looks like we have enough time for more Paul.
Exactly. More Paul. It's still the same Paul.
So 12 minutes. So you have 11 minutes. I'm sorry.
So
maybe
maybe
the mic on. Yeah.
So hi, this is also individual. This is also not clear that this is coming to this working group. So I talked about that on the last slide. I want to be clear. I'm not asking for this to come to the working group. I'm just alerting people about this because it's new since the last meeting. So one of the things that people have asked for since DOE became RFC 8484, and no, we didn't ask for the magic number, was a use case that is a browser or web application that's going to be a Doe client that actually wants to use the same resolver that the operating, that the operating system is using. So I want to be clear, we don't know yet how browsers are going to use Doe. There are browser folks here in the room. And by the way, just before we do the us versus them thing again, oh, I wish the browser vendors would come and stuff. Please don't assume that they aren't sitting in the room just because you don't recognize them, okay? What I will say is we don't know how browsers are going to do Doe. Even once they start doing Doe, we don't know how they're going to do it a little bit later. So if they are starting to do Doe, and this use case, which I've heard from a number of people in the last couple of months of, yeah, hey, if we want to do Doe, we want to do it to where we were already sending our normal DNS queries anyways. This might be of use, and if it's implemented, it would probably be in the UI of the browsers, but we don't know how the browser UI for Doe is going to look like either. This is all like, we don't have any idea. Now, one thing that's important about this is the use case is for a browser or a web application, read JavaScript, to be able to use. We are pretty sure that JavaScript is never going to have a UI. Like if you suck in some JavaScript on a web page, you're not all of a sudden going to be asked to choose this. So this might be a use case where someone says, oh, this would be great, except if it happens behind your back. This is all very dicey. We're talking user interface, we're talking about people doing DNS to places where you weren't sure and such like that. So this is still an individual draft. I just put out 05 today. And just to be clear, if you're thinking, oh, well, let's look at this, let's start implementing it. I have changed the bits on the wire in every goddamn version so far. I've gotten it wrong that many times. Don't implement this, okay? We're not even sure if anyone really is going to, if this is going to get adopted. I would love to have more discussion on it, but it is, if this is implementable, it will be easy. If it's not implementable, I want to hear that so we can stop. But don't think like, oh, well, Paul has an idea, let's go implement it. That would be like very wrong in this case. So then there's the question of what's next. I assure you this is above my pay grade. It's going to be chairs and area directors who are going to talk among each other about what to do with this. It might end up in DNSOP working group because this is a protocol change. The things that I've had in every version would say a resolver needs to look at a special thing and do a special thing. That sounds like DNSOP work. However, this is much more narrow than many of the things that we adopt in DNSOP. In DNSOP, it's usually like the DNS has sort of this operational problem. This is a way to fix it. This is a point solution for Doe. So maybe it doesn't belong here. Maybe it belongs in the Doe working group because it's only useful for Doe clients. However, it's not clear if that working group is going to continue, and it's also not clear if that's the working group where you want people working on things that would require changes in resolvers, which is so far all of the proposals I've had has done it. Or this might be way too early. It might be the let's let Doe come out and do stuff and then come back to this later. Again, none of those are my decisions. There'll be working group chairs and area directors who will, be working on this. Having said that, I've discussed this a couple of times on the Doe working group mailing list. The Doe working group did not shut down after the Doe document was completed, but as David Lawrence said, it's not clear what the status is going to be and such like that. So if people are interested in the use case, namely, I want to allow a browser or a web application to keep using the same thing, please take a look at the document I'm going to go back here because there's the title. Please look at the document. Right now, like I say, there's been a little bit of discussion on the Doe working group, it's still Doe working group mailing list. But this is really early and it might be too early.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So So the status is a bit unclear, but what do you ask
No,
now?
it's very clear. It's like it's nowhere near ready.
Yeah.
Right.
But
and it's nowhere. It's not clear where it's going to be.
Yeah. Exactly. And you ask now from the working group comments, review.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Yeah, or anybody, it doesn't, not working groups, anybody looking at this. And if you think that I've done, if I've tried to keep in there's a section towards the end of design choices, that's actually a list of failed designs that I had for previous drafts. So before you think, oh, let's do it this way, please read that section, because I think I listed what I did wrong every time. So,
thanks.
Great, thanks.
No, thank you. Thanks, Paul. So, and that actually concludes all our stuff. Oh, Dan's going to say something. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, no, not about this, about Paul's thing, something different. The one other thing I would say, I put a note out on the list the other day. I meant to suggest it for here, but if people are get a chance to look at something to review, there's a draft out about the deploying DNSSEC. What did we?
Crypto algorithms.
The crypto algorithms. And it was something that Andre, Paul, myself, Oliver had put together a couple of years back when we were doing the things. But in the KSK rollover, I had people who were asking me, why is DNSSEC so hard to upgrade, some stuff like that. And I would encourage people to take a look at that document and let us know, is that something that would be useful to get out there? Because I was pointing people to the then expired draft, and I revved it in advance of this because of that, because people were asking me, and I thought it was a useful summary. And if people think it's useful, please take a look at it and provide feedback. What else could we put in it? How else could, are we accurate? What's right in there?
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Dan. Also, the blue sheets are probably floating around. I just wanted to see if you guys make sure everybody signed those. John's got one side. There's one over there. So please. And that's what we've got for today. So thank you all for attending. And I guess we'll see y'all in Prague. So thanks.
It's cold.